Good morning, everyone. I see that we have some people joining already, so thank you for being here for the webinar today. We're going to give it a few minutes and start probably 1 minute after the hour, just to make sure we can let everyone in and not miss any content here early. So just a few minutes and we will get started. Thank you for your patience, and we'll talk to you soon. For those of you that have just joined the webinar, we're going to get started in about 1 minute. We've still got some people trickling in here, so we want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to log in and get all the content they can. So thank you for your patience, and we will be starting soon. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brett Fritz. We are going to go ahead and get started here. I have 1 minute after the hour on my clock. I'm sure there's going to be some more people that will be jumping on here as we had quite a few people register for this webinar today. But we're going to go ahead and get started. As I said, my name is Brett Fritz. Thank you for joining this webinar today, hosted by the James Saliba Executive Leadership Company, titled 4 Ways Leaders Get Stuck and How to Fix It. Just a couple housekeeping items. All of the attendees are on listen only mode. So even if you're muted or not, don't worry about it. We can't hear you. But the webinar is being recorded for later viewing, and there will be a link that you can download later, listen at your leisure, and there will be some other content that comes out around that. Plus, please submit any of your questions that you have into the Q&A box. I will be monitoring that throughout the entire webinar today. We'll try to get to a Q&A at the end, but if there's something urgent, technically related, etc., then I will be answering that for you. We're going to go ahead and test that out too. So on your webinar screen, down at the bottom, you should see a chat, raise your hand, Q&A. I would encourage everyone just to click on that Q&A box. It will open up a new screen, and I would love it if everyone could go ahead and just type in, say hello, type in where you're calling in from, and tell us across the board where you're calling from. We would love to see that and love to see where everyone's coming in from. So go ahead and do that if you don't mind. And then this will be the place as well where people will be, if you have questions coming in. Yeah, thank you. I see a couple coming in here. We've got guys from California, Michigan, Illinois. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for that. So please use that Q&A box as a place for you to be able to ask questions. And like I said, if it's urgent, if it's technically related, I will be answering that. Yeah, we've got West Coast, East Coast. Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for all of that. Okay, so then back to the webinar for today. So for the agenda, here's the topics we're going to talk about. So we are all here to listen to Jim speak and bestow his wisdom upon us, all about ways leaders get stuck. And so we're going to let him really dive into that topic. We're going to focus that in around the 4 fears that leaders get and how to get over those fears. And then we'll finish up with just ways to contact Jim, how to work with him. As I mentioned, if you do have questions, please put them into the Q&A box. And I'm seeing more and more where people are calling in from. So thank you for that. But please put it in the Q&A box if you have a question there, and we will try to answer it at the end, time permitting. But with that, let me go ahead and just introduce Jim. So Jim Saliba, I have been working with Jim now for a few months, really enjoyed getting to know him. He is the president of the James Saliba Executive Coaching Company. You can see some of the accolades over on the right-hand side. He is a certified professional coach. He is one of the top 100 leadership experts on Twitter. He's got a really big Twitter following. 45, 50,000 people follow him on Twitter. He puts out some great content. So Jim, please say hello and take it over from here. I am really excited about this. You and I have gone through the content at a high level, and so I'm excited to even dig into the weeds on some of these topics and points. But Jim, say hello and take it away.
Hi, everyone. This is Jim Saliba. I really want to thank everyone for investing your time and attending this webinar. I recognize a few names in the list here. It's good to connect with you guys again. I'm just really excited about this. But before I start really diving in, I have a question. If you can help me with a little bit of research that I continually drive. I talk to many audiences, different forums, and I always ask this following question. Stop for a second, think back over your life and your career. Think back about the worst boss or manager you ever had. Now think about one word of how that person made you feel, and take that one word and put it in the Q&A box. One word of how that person made you feel. Yep, I'm seeing a few things come here. Small is one. Yeah, that's one that I personally felt. Insignificant. Useless. I'm seeing a few more. Come on, I know you guys are out there. Mad. Yes, I agree with that. One more. Come on, I know you guys are out there. You can give me one more. Insignificant again. Okay. For many reasons, this is just plain, in my mind, failure of leadership. This is what happens. This is an example of how our brains are pre-programmed through our life. So let's think about this a little bit. I don't think anyone here has a problem when I say our brains are actually hardwired for stories. We think in stories, we remember in stories, we just turn every piece of our experience in stories. In fact, everyone, including myself right now, is probably thinking of one story in our life that talked about those feelings we just talked about, unimportant, burdens from some, and things like that. Okay, we have those stories. We use stories to solve problems, to convince people, to get our point across. The biggest narrator of stories in our life is actually ourselves. We have been there in our brain talking to us consciously and unconsciously from the moment we were born to every day, every hour since. We're there with ourselves. And we accumulate, categorize, collate every experience into stories, and we can narrate it back to ourselves at any instant. So this is what happens. This is how our brains work. Fortunately or unfortunately, our brains are extremely protective of us. And our brains are ready to kick in our fight or flight response into overdrive at any instant. I don't think it will surprise you when I say science shows that when this happens, blood flow to our frontal lobe decreases. And the frontal lobe is the part of the brain that is responsible for logical thinking. So what happens, we narrate to ourselves things like, that'll never work. I'm not good enough. If I do that, they'll laugh at me. Or even seemingly logical thoughts like, I don't have the resources or the time to do that. I need to do blank first. That's a very big one. We put blocks in front of ourselves. So what's happening here is fear is actually taking control. Now, you may be in meetings and we don't talk about the word fear. We may soften it. You may hear something like, well, I have a concern. Well, I feel a little uneasy about that. Well, my worry is, these are all words that mean fear. This is all fear. So great. Up to this point, I believe all of you have heard this type of information before, and I'm sure you've heard words and phrases like the amygdala that signals the body to respond to perceived threats, or our quote unquote reptile brain that turns us into flight or fight, or the hypothalamus that signals our glands to pump hormones, right? I've read a lot about this. I did a lot of research, reading hundreds of articles, research papers, books, and in my personal experience and observations, even though there are so many different viewpoints on this, everybody agrees with one thing: to change it, to be able to change it, you must recognize when it's happening first. If you can't recognize it, you can't change it. So we're going to talk about later in this webinar, my framework and the fixes of what to do when you're stuck. But first, we're going to identify what I call the 4 fears of leadership. These 4 fears plague every leader at one time or another. And if you go home today and all you get is the ability to recognize these things in yourself and in others, then your time, I think, would have been well invested, because we all need to be aware of these and be able to identify them when they happen. Okay, so our next slide, Brett, please. So quickly, so that we're on the same page, what is fear? Simply, the dictionary would say fear is a natural, powerful, and primitive human emotion. Fear alerts us to the possible presence of danger or threat of harm, whether that danger is physical, emotional, or psychological. Fear can be because of physical, emotional, or psychological. So let's keep that in mind. Okay, the first fear is the number one fear that I've seen that papers have talked about is the fear of being incompetent. This is the number one fear that every leader seems to go through. The big thing is fear. This fear is also called imposter syndrome. It's the number one fear, according to one survey that had about 120 CEOs. This one fear totally diminishes the confidence and undermines relationships that leaders could have with their peers and other executives. This is so common. The anxiety of this fear, imposter syndrome, actually affects the entire population, about 70% of people worldwide. So most of you, if not all of you, have felt this at one time or another. And I put this word doubt here. Doubt is the key thing. We put doubt in ourselves. I don't think I can do this. Why did they pick me to do this? I remember when I first went from being an individual contributor to a manager, this fear and the other three fears certainly ushered in. But I moved from being a manager, and I didn't to be a manager, as I said. But was not a manager of one group. I was a manager of three managers who each had a few groups under them. So I jumped from this individual contributor to a manager of managers. And yes, it really scared me. And that started my journey into this, to understand how to be a leader, what stops people. And I found it very interesting. And this is why I want to share it with all of you. So you don't have to go through and read the hundreds of papers and books and stuff like that. We can learn from it. So let's go to the next fear. The next fear is the fear of appearing foolish. Psychologically, research shows that security is our greatest emotional need. In fact, if you look up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for anybody, if you've never seen this before, it's 5 levels of need for humans. Down in the bottom, the very basic in the triangle, second level is safety and security. So this is one of the basic psychological human needs, is security. And this is why this fear comes in. Its need for approval shows up here. FOMO, fear of missing out, is a security issue, right? It shows up here. Trying to please everyone, almost at any cost, shows up here. All these types of behaviors show up in this category. This becomes noticeable to others, and it might come off as saying yes to things that we clearly do not resonate with. It can come off as being desperate and lacking an internal compass. So if you see those things, you're seeing this type of fear. So let's go to our next one. This is a very common one, fear of not achieving or unachieving. This is also called fear of failure. Fear of underachieving has us question every decision as it is the one that's going to bring us down. Every decision is the one that's going to bring us down. So then we catastrophize it. We make it much worse than it is. You envision yourself out on the street hungry and no job, and everybody's making fun of us because of this one decision you're about to make. This fear can actually be very self-fulfilling. It blocks essential energy and creativity, forcing us into what Carol DeWick in her book calls a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. So we don't have the positive energy to look at things and have a growth mindset to change it. In this fear, people become very non-committal. They try to detach themselves from every decision. You might be in an organization where you see leaders passing the buck of the decision up to the next level so that they don't get caught. Well, it wasn't my decision. This grows actually into an inability to network or get along with others, which really is a critical skill for success and achievement, especially when you're leading a team. So when we look at this, this particular fear, the lack, gets compounded by lack of focus because we can't make a decision. We don't make a decision, so there's no real goal or picture of success. Or just the opposite, we make rash decisions. In my experience, when you see this, a bunch of extra, unnecessarily work gets on it because we didn't make decisions. And then there turns to be a lot of churn, which causes problems with your teams. So watch for this one. Our fourth fear is the fear of appearing vulnerable. This is actually a very interesting fear, probably the deepest, most underestimated, the least admitted fear of every single human being on this planet. As we discussed earlier, we're hardwired to protect ourselves of any real or potential threat. So what are we doing a lot in this fear? In this case, we feel that we have to put on a facade that shows a stronger, more confident person than we might be. Ultimately, this fear roots from the fear of rejection. If you read any of Brene Brown's books or seen any of her videos, she does a lot of work in this area. And she talks about, over her years of research, this fear, the fear of showing ourselves, as we are, is very overwhelming challenge. And because of it, it makes us less than what we actually can be. So when you feel that you must put on a different facade for work than home, you're feeling this fear. When we dress in a virtual suit of armor to walk into meetings, you're feeling this fear. When you're avoiding to contact people, or you're not going to do anything unless it's absolutely perfect, this could be this fear. So, as I said, here are the four fears. The first step is awareness. I'm asking you for your courage to put in the Q&A box right now if you ever felt these fears and which one or ones. Even if you observed it in someone else, put it in the box here. Remember, one is fear of being incompetent. Two is fear of appearing foolish. Three is fear of underachieving. And four is fear of appearing vulnerable. Go ahead, put those in the box.
Hey Jim, Brett here. So just as people are starting to fill those in, I'll speak from my own experience. The imposter syndrome is something that I've struggled with, and it's hard to admit that, right? It's hard to be vulnerable and admit that openly, but that's definitely something that that resonated well with me. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I see a few more coming in. Yep. Fear of vulnerable seems to be a big one as well. And the fear of incompetent, that doubt, seems to be another big one. Great. So we have all felt this one way or another, or we've seen it. I'd like to kind of summarize it for a second and say a little context around this. When I remember reading an article about 5 years ago, 100 and some odd CEOs were surveyed, and 95% of them said their executive team members had very limited view of their own fears. Only about 2/3 of them believe they had some self-awareness of this stuff going on. And of these top 4 fears that they see, some of the dysfunctional behaviors include lack of honest conversations, too much political game playing, silo thinking instead of thinking of the whole company and the system. Lack of ownership and follow through was a big one, and tolerating bad behaviors from their people. When asked to think about the fallout from these dysfunctional behaviors of leaders, Executives mentioned more than 500 consequences that come out of it. These are most frequently, and if you like, yell out in the Q&A, if you have seen these in your own org, one of the biggest bad behaviors that come out of this is poor decision making, or actually failure to make a decision or act unless it becomes a crisis. We wait just way too long. People are focusing more on survival rather than growth. And I've seen that so many times in so many organizations. And the other one is leaders with some of these dysfunctions are actually introducing bad behaviors in the next level or levels down from them. So when you add this all up, it's no wonder so many of us have these failure of leadership experiences. In my belief, and I believe it is a strong systematic problem across all our companies and associations, and it directly stems from these 4 fears. So let's take a look at them. I call them the four story horizons, or sometimes I call it the 4 chapters of unprecedented leadership. I have watched and read studies and many successful leaders, and I have found that these 4 activities, when we combine them together, put together these chapters, and we get unprecedented leaders. So the first one, chapter 1, is actually commandeering your story. And 3 points in here is to take that negative narrative that we tell ourselves and exchange it for a vision story. Now, I know I use the word vision here. I don't mean the vision statement that we make for our company or our department or even your personal vision statement. This is a full-blown story of what your life is like when you achieve this thing that you want to achieve and why it's valuable to you. And we could talk about that further a little later. But the second point is, no, not yet, we're still on commandeer. The second point to commandeer is adaptive strategy. So many people tell me, yes, I can create up with the vision, Jim, but I can't get it to happen. I put a plan out, and as soon as we start to execute it, things change, and I don't know what to do. So we talk about adaptive strategies. What are the milestones that you want to get into? Let's not put all the pieces in there. And the third point to commandeering your story is prioritizing values, not prioritizing actions. And in this, right, in a lot of ways, commandeering your story helps combat against that feeling incompetent, because it gives you a vision of where you're going, a high-level strategy to get there, and the priorities. It gets you going. The second chapter is activate your story. This helps you sometimes with that, I feel foolish, I don't know what to say, so I don't say anything. And the 3 points that I want to talk about in activating your story is learning through execution. Don't build a high detailed plan. In today's world where things are moving really fast and our customers and our stakeholders want more input to what's going on in the decision making, we actually now deliver value by experimenting. We put small experiments in, we look at it, we learn from it, and we do the next one. The second point of activate your story is to build a cadence of valuable events that allow us to measure and assess the value that's going on. In here, we're going to give your people, your teams, the critical boots on the ground guardrails and guidelines to make decisions. So this way, we're distributing some of the learning that has to go on. That means we need to be transparent with them, with the what, the why, the when, the how. The third point here in Activate Your Story is refine, refine, and refine. We're taking things that we're learning through execution, we're gathering it through the cadence, and we're going to take a look at it, understand it, and loop it back up again to our adaptive strategy and keep that in a short feedback loop so that we are not overshooting or derailing where we need to go. We're using decisions as it happens. Chapter 3 is empowering your story. We have teams. This helps you combat the underachieving. Over the past several years, everyone is talking about high performance teams. I can't tell you how much I hear about high performance teams, high productive teams. This is good, but if they're not focused on value, we are delivering just stuff. So what I want us to look at, and the first point here, is how do we build high value teams? Remember, one, we prioritize in value. This is how it comes through. We build teams that are focused on value, not stuff. The other thing in this chapter is building a culture of learning. So often our organizations have a culture of fear of failure. If I fail, I'm going to lose my job. If I fail, I'm not going to move up and be promoted. Here, the building a culture of learning is learning how to experiment. And many of our experiments will fail, but that's fine because we learn more from those failures often than we do about our successes. So building a teams of high value, building a culture of learning is this chapter. The fourth chapter is how to sustain your story. This aligns with the fear of appearing vulnerable. In this story, we talk about an adaptive mindset that really makes your whole set of chapters really work. You need that adaptive mindset, that growth mindset. The second point here is growing what we would call executive presence, building awareness. Sometimes that big part of that buzzword is emotional intelligence, but also building a skill of communicating simply and concisely through authenticity. This helps bring connection to people, composure, and that builds your whole 4 chapters of unprecedented leadership. I don't have time today to go into detail of all of these, but we're going to try out one thing here. Let's look at your new story. This is where the whole thing starts. So imagine right now we're no longer in this COVID-19 world. You're allowed to travel any place you want, like we were a few months back. And imagine you are at an amazing vacation place 6 months from now. 6 months from now. It might be that you're relaxing on a beach, or it may be that you are on this highest mountain, skiing newly packed powder slope, whatever it is. Or you might be out for the evening, sitting in an amazing restaurant, wonderful food, maybe your favorite beverage, a glass of wine, whatever it is, with somebody. Now think about this for a second. What did you do? What did you accomplish that allows you to have this reward? Why are you celebrating this achievement? Write that down. Write that down right now. And when you write that down or type it in, think of it in very clear, positive, and present language, like it already happens. This is a day in your life that you're celebrating what you have done. You have that in your mind? Now think about your new story. Write down the day in your life of what it looks like that you made this story happen. What your day in your life look like now. I may be at a higher level in my promotion. I might have gotten a raise. I might have more teams to work with, to execute with. What does a day in your life look like? Let's think about that. Now, what are the top 3 challenges you overcame to make this new story worth this celebration? What are the top 3 challenges? Now, you accomplished all this. You're celebrating. You made these 3 challenges happen. Like we started with that one word, what's the one word now that you would put of how you feel that you accomplished this in 6 months from now? What's that word? And put that word right now in the QA box. Team came together for a major accomplishment as one. Yes, Brett.
I was just going to add my word here is, and this might be a little off, but I'd love your perspective on it, is relief.
Relief. I was able to do these challenges, right? Somebody else here says they're feeling high. They're riding high like, wow, we were able to do this. Somebody else, one more word. Fantastic is another one that's out there. Great. Yes. So we're trying to take that negative narrative and replace it with this major accomplishment that you're feeling high, that you're feeling relief, that you no longer feel burdened, that you no longer feel unimportant. This is what your new story to commandeer. So every time you're using challenges, we're going to work with this. So that's pretty much where I am today. I'd love to get feedback from anybody. So put in your story. My email we'll have later on. I'd love to hear your stories. Put your story in, send it to me in an email. I'm not going to spam you with a lot of other stuff. Don't worry about it. I just love to hear some of your stories. So please feel free to put them in an email and send them to me.
Yeah, Jim, I think this is great. So first off, thank you. Love going through exercises like this. I want to finish up with, if people would like to contact you or find ways to work with you, you have outlined a few different ways people can work with you. So 2 different paths. Let's start with the first one. So the first path of working with Jim would be on a do-it-yourself, a DIY type model. And that would include sitting in on webinars like this, getting some free resources. You've got a video channel on YouTube that typically every other week, maybe every other 3rd week, you're putting out new little snippets of free video content. A lot of that content is just pulling from your book, which is another free resource, or do-it-yourself resource that you can buy on Amazon. But great resources there, short little 2 to 3, maybe 5-minute videos. So there's the DIY approach, which I love. The second approach would be is if someone does want to get a little deeper into it, you do have your coaching company. And you are offering right now free 30-minute consultations. And there's a link that I'm going to show here in a second that people can just schedule right onto your calendar as soon as tomorrow if you had any openings there. And that would be to really get deeper into executive coaching, training, both on an individual basis and then also corporate level basis, whether it's a team or a full organization. And you've got some great success working with people there. So if you are interested and you're on the line here, several ways you can work with Jim, the DIY and more of a professional engagement perspective. Ways to contact Jim, several different ways here. So I'm going to leave the screen up in case anyone wants to jot anything down. But Jim, if they want to email you directly, jim@thejamessaliba.com email address. Your website is just jamessaliba.com. You're very active on LinkedIn and Twitter, like we talked about. I mentioned the YouTube channel. If you just go to YouTube and type in Jim Talk Moments, that's going to show up, and we encourage you to subscribe or just take a look at those videos when you can. And then you have a Calendly, which is, if you're not familiar with that, it's a great simple way to pull up Jim's calendar of open consultation slots. And he can schedule right directly with you at a time that works best for you. So I'm going to come back to the screen, but just as a final thank you to everyone that joined us today. Thank you, Jim, for the words of wisdom. I took a lot away from this, and I always like to say that if you learn one thing on a webinar, it's been a good success, and I definitely learned a lot today. So thank you for that, Jim. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I'd like to keep these to under 45 minutes. We've got a few minutes left here, so I'd love to come back to the contact page, leave that up. But Jim, we do have a couple questions. Do you mind just answering a few questions that came in here?
Sure, that'll be great.
So I'm going to start with this one that came in. I like this one because it says, can you explain the difference between doubt and vulnerability? So what's the difference between being vulnerable or being doubtful? Can you give more detail on that?
Let me see. I would say that feeling vulnerable, of course, is the actual fear. The doubt, the fact that someone like ourselves, we doubt ourselves, are hesitant to show our authentic self, is how the fear, in this case, may manifest outwardly. I'm reminded of some recent research for coaches like myself that I always go and look at. And they were talking about how many coaches go out, they set up a goal, they ask you, well, what's stopping you? Well, what's getting in your way? And this actually plays into the fear. They're important questions, I agree, but they come from a point of negativity, which is what we want to do the opposite at. We want you to take your internal negative narrator that takes that doubt and turns it into a fear, and we want to kind of get around it so it's not blocking your creativity or your power to problem solve. So I would say this is time, if you're feeling this is time for you to commandeer your own story and get rid of that negative narrator that's going on.
Perfect. Love it. So this next question, I could have written this myself. This is me to a T. So thank you for whoever put this in. Question is, it seems like I get stuck all the time. Is that normal?
Oh, gee, well, I could add that question for myself as well. It is something that happens to many of us. What's normal is for many people is different than others, but this getting stuck, if we look at what it is, what's going on underneath, this is allowing your negative narrator to get into control. So it's more about taking that and replacing it with a positive story to make it your own and give less time for that negative narrator to be there. When I talk to leaders all the time, often I hear three things. I'm overwhelmed with work. I have conflicting priorities, which puts me at a standstill. And I don't feel persuasive enough or to communicate any type of shift within the organization. So if any of these three things resonate with you, I'm going to cut it down to the bone here really quick and say that when we work with most of these, what we ultimately find is that we're cutting ourselves off at the knees. We get ourselves frozen or stuck because we are not making the decision of what to do versus something else. Decisions on how we evolve prioritizing our work gets frozen. And that just tells our teams, it actually gives them more work to do. We end up burning them out. We end up losing and not holding on to good employees, and the turnover goes through the roof because we can't prioritize clearly. This is mainly because we're afraid we're going to make the wrong call. Our boss is going to call us out. We're going to appear foolish. So we're not making decisions that are thinking about the growth. They're putting survival first. And our employees are actually paying the bigger price for that. If this is a continual problem for you, I highly recommend that you think about some services that might be in your companies that have internal coaching or mentor programs that you might use. If not, go into my Calendarly, do a connect and chat, and we'll do 30 minutes. But this is not a normal thing, especially coming up through the ranks of leadership.
Jim, I love it. I'm going to ask you one more because I think this one really resonates well. And I know that you a lot of times will build videos and future content off of questions you get. So this might be one because this relates to a personality. So the question is, my personality is one that is a bit more reserved and shy. This often leads to me being afraid to step out of my comfort zone in the workplace, even though I know it will help my leadership presence. Wow, powerful. Any advice?
This very much reminds me of a time in my career where I would be sitting in meetings, and actually there's a few people I see on the list that know me from Computer Associates. And this is when I was first there and before I became a manager. I'll be sitting in meetings and a topic would come up and we'd be sitting around a conference table talking about it. And I would be very silent, if you can imagine that. But eventually someone would say to me, to try to drag me into the conversation, say, Jim, what do you think? And I could feel my face getting red, getting hot. I could just feel the laser focus of all the eyeballs in the room looking at me. So I'm assuming when you say reserved or shy, you're kind of feeling the same thing. So I went out and I say, well, I agree with what John said. I wasn't wrong. I did agree with what he was saying, but I thought about it long before it was even said, and I had the opportunity to say it, but my shyness or my fear of not having a good answer or appearing foolish, what if they don't like my answer, kind of took over on me. At some point in time, learning from myself, I did commandeer my own story and started actually contributing to discussions. Sometimes I would challenge myself to say, I have to say something at this meeting, and I just built from there. And it made me feel better. And I found that John says, yeah, I agree with what Jim was thinking, right? And we start building off of that. Then I noticed that people would come by my desk and start asking me questions and my thoughts on various topics. And that all of a sudden helped me grow as a leader within my organization. So I would say if you're being self-aware of your shyness, that's great. Identify that fear narrative that's stopping you, and let's take it over. Put a course into way to have a deeper conversation. And again, if you want to, you can sign up for a connect and chat, and we can talk about it. But it's about taking that over. I hope that answered your question.
Jim, thank you. This has been phenomenal. So thank you to everyone that joined us today. As I mentioned at the beginning, this video has been recorded, so there will be a link coming out that you can check it out later and watch again and pick up additional notes, go through the process again, look at those 4 horizon stories at any step here. So Jim, thank you. Everyone have a wonderful day, and we will speak with you soon. Bye.
Take care, everyone.